I am 110% excited to fight this boss. The vast desert lands, a giant trail drifts through the sky. Thou art not alone. It's a quick journey to him, requiring a leisurely stroll through the autumn forest and into that desert that lays beyond it. We'll also be passing the little pond that I called attention to before we took on our favorite Colossus, Barba. On the way, we have something very exciting to discuss that came in the form of a brand spanking new cutscene, complete with a single line of dialogue and all the trappings therein. 6 masked men came to a halt at the mouth of a canyon that opens up to a plateau, staring onwards at a familiar object, the gated entrance to the Forbidden Lands. The group is seemingly led by a man atop a white horse with a particularly interesting mask. Interesting not only because it differs and is more colorful than the mask of those around him, but because we've seen it before. In the very beginning of the game, before we were even given control of Wander, the mask slowly encroached upon our viewpoint while a voice described the Forbidden Lands in pretty uncertain terms. Most importantly, I suppose, it introduced Wander's motivation, reviving a lost soul. Only a little more to go, the leader says before we're thrown back into the focus on Wander. Who these men are and why they're approaching the Forbidden Lands is a complete mystery. Their motivations could be anything, and we're forced to fight the next Colossus all the same, knowing of an impending force that will most likely impede on our solitude. We can only hope, for Wander's own sake, that he can complete his task in time. Phalanx, the first Colossus that comes to mind whenever I'm reminded of this game, soars through the sky while coiling itself to and fro, slowly making its way around the desert. I mentioned previously that this Colossus is without doubt my favorite, and in case it wasn't obvious already, I think the main contributor to that is the sheer scale of the encounter. Phalanx is the largest Colossus of them all at an estimated 557 feet. According to the Team Eco Wiki, which I absolutely recommend checking out if you're a fan of this game or Eco, his rear half matches the width of a 4-lane highway. Also, the high-pitched, echoing quips that Phalanx makes when he forces his way out from beneath the sand is incredibly unique, and I love the way it sounds. But enough with the gawking. The targets that Wander must hit with his arrows are the 3 glowing pustules on Phalanx's underside. Luckily, the desert gives you so much room that you don't have to worry about controlling aggro too much while you take your aim. I didn't have the easiest time with them, but it wasn't too rough either. After all 3 sacks are popped, Phalanx will start to lose height and go into more of a glide, embedding his wings into the sand to keep himself above ground and inadvertently presenting Wander with a perfect opportunity to advance, as these wings are filled to capacity with evenly spaced ridges, perfect for grappling. For the first time I did this, Phalanx dove underneath the sand before coming above again, which I saw as him sort of trying to give himself a bit of momentum, but without the sacks he was unable to lift himself fully off of the ground. I'm not entirely sure what about those things on his belly aids in his ability to fly, but I do enjoy the concept as a whole. Similarly to Hydrus, Wander needs to make his way down the length of the boss and stab 3 sigils in order to be victorious. Phalanx, however, has a much lower tolerance for pain It looks like Phalanx has taken a few notes from Avion. It's too bad that the game's camera doesn't give us a very good opportunity to appreciate the animation of his take on the barrel roll. With the boss now being right side up, it's time to make our way to the second sigil. Before we could even get a stab in, Phalanx lowered that flap and protected itself from the wrath of the ancient sword. Phalanx is the only boss in the game that is able to do that, by the way. It's not exactly a significant thing to note, as it doesn't change our understanding of him or his environment too much, but it's interesting all the same. I had a little trouble pinpointing the location of the Colossus after he dove down, as using L1 didn't seem to help and would just point the camera directly at the ground that Aggro was treading, but I'm glad that I was treated as such a good angle of him re-emerging, and a healthy dose of particle effects. As we eliminate the pustules for a second time, I'm going to point out something that you may have noticed. Phalanx has not done a single thing to directly assault Wander. He has made absolutely no attempt to attack him, even after he knows that we mean to cause him harm, all the way to the end. He is, no question, the most peaceful Colossus, and that gives this encounter just a tinge of tragedy. If there was any way that I could regress the story without having to defeat Phalanx, I would every time, and just have him fly about over the Forbidden Lands while I defeated the Colossi that are mean and looking to hurt me. The game's Japanese title translates to Wander and the Colossus. If only it was Wander and the Colossus, and also his good buddy Phalanx who flies around and doesn't do very much but looks really cool. After climbing on top for a second time, we have to rush to the second point, which is easy enough. Besides the barrel roll that I'm so fond of, Phalanx does very little to disrupt Wander's conviction. Once you're on top of him, it's very difficult to fall off. I tried my damnedest to finish the fight on my second trip, but didn't make the cut. After removing the pustules a third time, I solemnly went to the third and final sigil. Once you're here, at the very tail end of the boss, I enjoy how the game sort of forces you to look outwards at the lands below as a kind of final farewell to the size and scope of this truly one-of-a-kind Colossus. A guardian set loose, a closed-off city beyond the channel. It lusts for destruction. Sadly, another cutscene was not awaiting us after Phalanx fell, but that's completely okay, as our next Colossus is a blast to fight. I won't be giving too much away before we get there, but I am excessively pleased that Dorman didn't exaggerate the next area. It absolutely is a city, and I can't wait for you to see it. I hadn't really thought to do this as I was playing through, but I wanted to show you the map a little bit now that we've been to so many different nooks and crannies of the Forbidden Lands and cleared up a lot of the clouds that previously blocked our view. All of the Colossi even have cute little icons to show you where they are that stand out very clearly thanks to the etched, rustic nature of the map itself. The Forbidden Lands are very well represented with that map, I feel, reminding you of the geography even though the perspective is completely different. Back when video game cheats and tips and tricks sort of websites were still a thing, I remember reading often with Shadow of the Colossus that it was possible to grab onto the hawks that approach wander as you ride aggro throughout the lands. There's even a trophy in this HD collection for hanging onto it for 30 seconds, a trophy I have yet to get, I might add. At the time, I didn't disbelieve them per se, but I have never, to this day, been actually able to do it myself. On a related note, I didn't point this out because I completely blanked and forgot about it, but in the lake outside of the entrance to Kuromori's Colosseum, there's actually a big-ass fish that Wander can also hang on to, and, you guessed it, there's a trophy for hanging on to that one too. The trophy for that is called Slippery Ride, if you want to see it, and the hawk one is called Hang Glider. Unfortunately, as much as it pains me, this will be the last time that we trek through these plains before our time with the game is up. It's quite the send-off, though, as we're delving deeper than we ever have before. Notably, in this playthrough, this next Colossus is the only one whose path forces us to see the corpse of a previous boss. The monument to Bassaron's demise stands meekly in the midst of the field of geysers as a mere fraction of the size of his former glory. Though tempting, Wander has no time to reminisce and presses on. It's always pretty exciting to see anything at all man-made in the Forbidden Lands. These small, lonesome steps lead into a collection of dead trees, an It makes one think and imagine the people that used to live here, if any did at all, in a time long since past, and why they would need those steps to begin with. And right after it, we see these uniform pillars sandwiching a path as if to draw our steps their way. This will lead us directly to the channel that lays before the closed-off city that Dorman mentioned. This is earnestly one of the most striking moments of the entire game. It's simply gorgeous and excessively memorable thanks to the detail in the shaft of sunlight and the ivy hanging down from the opening. Also, man, if I was Wander, I would seriously start getting pissed off at how often I had to leave my best friend Aggro behind and swim through probably freezing water just to get to another fight. What I enjoy about this tiny cavern is that it gives no hints as to the appearance of the upcoming city, forcing you to imagine the different options that could possibly be presented as you walk through it. And then you see the actual city, complete with a catchy jingle, and it's damn gorgeous. I wouldn't go so far as to call this a sprawling metropolis or anything, but I love the size of it. This canal that we have to climb out of at first is very reminiscent of Eco to me, but the overgrown nature is unique, with the moss and bright greenery that's infested every inch of it. When the fight starts, we'll have many an opportunity to appreciate the surroundings. Cenobia probably makes the most recognizably real noises, sounding almost one-for-one like a lion at many points. Functionally, he's very similar to Colossus in the sense that being on even ground with him is almost a death sentence, as he can also animation lock you until it's game over. And they even share preview text from Dorman in them both being described as a guardian set loose. The way to defeat Cenobia, however, is much more involved. As you've already seen, Wander has to channel his ability to parkour to a heretofore unseen degree and make his way across pillars and buildings scattered throughout the city in order to outsmart the boss. As we progress, we'll be using Cenobia's unshakable belligerence against him. As I fought this boss, I was still remembering how to properly progress through it, and I thought it logical enough to try to jump back to the platform before it fell completely, but I missed my mark. When I regained control after the quick scene, I was nervous that Cenobia would barrel right for me, and so I ran all the way back to the beginning pillar to start the whole climbing sequence again, when I could just as well have grabbed onto the fallen pillar and resumed from where I left off. Thankfully, I don't make that mistake again, so don't worry stretch of the fight. We basically have to do the same thing that we did for that first pillar, but many times in succession. It's strange to me that Cenobia will always ram into the structure that you're on once, and then you have to provoke him with an arrow in order for him to do it again. I suppose it may have been a countermeasure to boredom. Perhaps the developers felt that if the players had to do something more than just stand around, it would mask the repetition a bit, but who knows? Since we have all this extra time, I'll talk about the city itself. While it is my favorite arena, and it is incredibly interesting to look at, I do feel that just a few more steps could have been taken to make it feel a bit more lived in, like an actual ancient city. Mainly, I think the excessive amount of empty space was a bit of a misstep. Now that may sound harsh, and I realize that they had to worry about the encounter and how the player would perceive their environment while playing, first and foremost. But I feel as though the Team Eco developers could have very easily found a creative way around this, and I'm sad that they didn't. Even with the empty space aside, none of the structures in this area have doors or windows to speak of, making it kind of a challenge to imagine that this was once an area where people lived out their lives. I also can't imagine that these evenly spaced pillars that we're climbing up and over now have very conventional a purpose. Well, that was scary. I don't really mean to be as harsh on the arena as I sound, I think. After all, it is my favorite, and there are, of course, reasons that one could think of to explain the lack of those things that I mentioned. For example, Cenobia was stationed atop the stairs leading to a temple-ish structure. Perhaps this was sacred ground as evidenced by that, and this actually was not a place for living, but I just can't buy it. I would probably be more willing to accept something like that if there was another location in the Forbidden Lands that did feel more residential, but there just isn't. All in all, it's not a very big deal, though. Just the nature of this environment is great. This structure adds a nice change of pace before our last pillar, requiring just a little bit more handiwork to get on top. That could not have been pleasant. Unfortunately, I have to fade out and in here to my second attempt, because as soon as I jumped on solid ground, I turned around and Cenobia knocked me to the ground over and over again until I died in a small corner of this arena. It was directly beside the ladder too, as if to rub it in that much more that I would have to redo the fight. Now back at the entrance to the sealed-off city, we have to beckon Cenobia one last time before his weakness is revealed to us. I thought it was curtains for Wander at that point, but by some miracle I was able to escape and start the climb up to safer ground. Frustratingly, I wasn't able to find the same sweet spot that I did on Celosia, and you're about to see how desperately I wanted to get just a single attack off while being taken for a ride across the entire city. It took me a while to realize and remember what the game clearly intended you to do. Cenobia is excessively talented at getting Wander off of his back. It's convenient that, since you're holding R1 to hang on to the beast itself, the game automatically forces you to cling to the edge of the platform. There, now that seems a lot more manageable. With the optimal way of dealing damage discerned, all we have to do now is repeat it. Cenobia boasts a pretty extensive HP meter, but that's not enough to deter Wander. He'll strike as many times as it takes to get closer to his goal. Those were some mad jukes. Just saying. After making a few fumbles throughout the battle, I was happy to find that continuously using this pillar seemed like the speediest way to get the job done, and used it to hurt Cenobia to the last. It's time to say goodbye to the city. Thanks a ton for spending this time with me. The end isn't too far off now. I hope you've enjoyed your time so far, and I hope you enjoy what's to come.